Hey everybody, I hope you all are doing well, staying safe and healthy through these bizarre times. And I hope you guys are all finding some inner peace during, kind of all the chaos out there. Today's video lecture is on theocracy, and you guys have probably heard of theocracy before. Really, all it means, right, is it's when there's no barrier between church and state. In other words, a particular country's main religion asserts control over the government and essentially establishes a government that ends up promoting that particular religion. That, in a nutshell, is what a theocracy is. So it's like religious dominated government, religion controlling the state. Now, obviously, there's been several examples of theocracy in history. We forget that here in America, the Massachusetts Bay Colony, before the U.S. actually became an official nation, was very much a theocracy. It promoted Puritan beliefs, extreme interpretations of Protestantism. That dominated in Massachusetts Bay. You think like the Salem witch trials and all that, right? In contemporary times, some of the most famous theocracies, and you guys had readings on them, is Saudi Arabia, right, which is an extreme theocracy, and Iran, right, which is another theocracy. It's worth maybe getting into a little bit of discussion about Saudi Arabia, right? The Saudi royal family, otherwise known as the House of Saud, they promote an extreme form of Islam. Now, again, like 99% of Muslims do not agree with what I'm about to describe. In fact, most Muslims would say that what I'm going to describe is a total defilement of what Islam really actually represents, which is more peace and unity and oneness, right? But the Saudis are a prime example of theocracy. They adhere to an extreme form of Islam called Wahhabism, right? And really what Wahhabi is it goes back to a medieval interpretation of Islam. It rejects any notion of the secular liberal state. And some of its main guiding ethos really is women are considered second-class citizens. You guys probably have heard this before. In fact, last year, women just got the right to be able to drive their own car, right? Really progressing, right, in Saudi Arabia. If you're an adulteress, particularly if you're a woman who has been unfaithful to your husband, you can actually be executed in brutal fashion. Public stonings are not uncommon still in Saudi Arabia, as sick as that may sound, right? They adhere to, you must pray to Allah, God, right, a certain amount of times a day. Now, the difference between Wahhabism and regular Islam is it's voluntary for you to pray 5-6 times a day. Under Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia, you must pray, at least 5 times a day. If you don't, there are punishments, right? And so it's a very strict variant, right? That would be an extreme theocracy. We know about one last thing. One of maybe the most horrific forms of theocracy that's come into our consciousness over time was the rise of ISIS. You guys may have heard about this, right? The Islamic State, which was a group of religious fundamentalists, again, very similar to Saudi Arabia, extreme interpretations of Islam, does not represent the mainstream religion. And they grew out of the turmoil that came out of Iraq and Syria after the Iraq War in 2003. And of course, the Syrian conflict, which really escalated in 2013 and is still ongoing, right? An Islamic State, obviously is still around. It's not as powerful as it was, but a barbaric, religious-centered state. Focus on subjugation of women. If you disagree with its leaders, you can be executed. They do public beheadings. You guys have heard about all that kind of gruesome stuff ISIS is involved in. Now, less known to Americans, right, is that we may actually, here in America, have aspects of theocracy. Now, to be fair, church and state are fairly separated, right, in America. And that's one thing we've always prided ourselves on, right? But, right, one of the articles you had suggests that America has a very active religious fundamentalist group, predominantly so-called evangelicals, Christians, who come from the wing of Protestantism, right? You might think of, for example, the Southern Baptists would hit this, right? And this group has wanted to assert tremendous political influence over the state, and they would like to see their social policies become political policy. So these Christian, they're also called the Christian right or Christian conservatives. They became very vocal, actually, guys, in the mid-70s, 80s, and grew in enormous numbers in the 90s and 2000s. And they were like a reaction to a lot of the more kind of like progressive reforms that came out of the 60s and 70s, right? So they're like the Christian right wants to see, Roe versus Wade, abortion rights for women, that is, right, to be overturned. They do not support gay marriage and want to see gay marriage overturned. They support prayer in public schools. They're against doctor-assisted suicide, which actually is legal in Colorado. They're against the legalization of marijuana. They've been some of the biggest roadblocks to certain states, particularly in the South, legalizing the plant, right? They are, a very vocal wing, right, who has found a lot of expression within the Republican Party, right? And some argue that this group is trying to influence political policy, or at least sway it in a way where the interests of fundamentalist Christians weigh out over other faiths and voices, if that makes sense, right? Now, this group called the Christian Right, again, evangelicals pushing a very conservative social agenda, they found a very staunch ally in President Trump, right? So Trump has nominated many judges to the federal courts that could be considered Christian right sympathizers. He even has evangelical Christians heavily represented in his major cabinet positions within the White House, right? So, some argue that, here in America, we have, some tendencies maybe towards theocracy. Now, I leave you with this question. Do you think religion should have a place in politics? Should it not have a place in politics? Maybe you find yourself more in the middle ground that, religion should have a say or should have a role in our political culture, but to what extent, right? So just a question to ponder. I hope you guys stay well, stay peaceful, stay healthy, be well.